Welcome to this, the second in our series, Leadership Legacies, CARIMAC Directors Speak. I'm Patrick Prendergast, the director at CARIMAC, and just to let you know that we at the Caribbean School of Media and Communication, CARIMAC, are celebrating 50 years of providing higher education and training at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. Over the 50 years since its establishment in 1974, as the UWI Institute of Mass Communication with one, let's call it a one-year full-time diploma in mass communication, CARIMAC has evolved into a full-fledged school of media and communication offering 5 distinct undergraduate programs, a few graduate programs, and of course, a research PhD program. We've also had the privilege of being led by some outstanding individuals who have brought their own unique strength to bear upon the pride of place CARIMAC enjoys in the minds of our Caribbean people, and in the many professional spaces our hundreds of graduates occupy across the globe. I know the late Professor Agri-Brown easily comes to mind for many, as he led our institution for just over 2 decades as director, and on April 11, 2025, CARIMAC alum and UWI's first blind professor, Dr. Floyd Morris, will in fact deliver the 15th annual CARIMAC Agri-Brown Distinguished Lecture, which of course is in honor of one of our most celebrated directors. As the latest to join the rank of CARIMAC directors, and in this special year, I see CARIMAC at 50 as a significant reflexive point. And as I said at our anniversary launch in October 2024, this is really an opportunity for us to celebrate, but it is also gives us a chance to critically assess how we have come this far, where we are now, and what we will do to remain agile, responsive, innovative, and future thinking in building our school and the media and communication industries we serve across the entire Caribbean space. This is our legacy, impact. This is our future, innovation. And this series of public fora is about celebrating our leadership legacy. It is also about recognizing that there is great value among our staff, our student, and alumni population that must be shared with the public. And what better way to underscore that statement than to ask our former directors to curate a special engagement on a topic of their choice with a panel of their choosing. In this March Legacy series, Dr. Canute James would have looked at the future of journalism in Jamaica and the Caribbean. That was on March 12. On the 26th, Dr. Marjan de Brun Maxwell will guide a discussion on media and violence, a story of renewal or stagnation. Today, though, Dr. Livingston White has brought together a distinguished panel of experts to talk about shifts in development communication and CARIMAC's evolution across these shifts. So I want to take the time to thank Dr. White and his panelists, Dr. Lovette Byfield, social and behavior change communication and public health specialist. Then there is Miss Gail Hoad, who is really spending time with us at CARIMAC as well as a lecturer, communication for development specialist, and writer and producer and behavior change communication specialist, Miss Janet Morrison. I really want to thank you for sharing this time and platform with us. We're deeply grateful and we look forward to an enlightening session. So it is my pleasure to introduce our curator and moderator for this edition of the CARIMAC Leadership Legacies Directors Series, Dr. Livingston White. Dr. Livingston White served as director of CARIMAC from August 1, 2018 to July 31, 2024. He's currently on sabbatical for the 24-25 academic year, during which, among other activities, he's a visiting scholar at Griffith University's Center for Social Marketing in Australia. Dr. White has been associated with CARIMAC since 1994, first as a student and later as a faculty member since 2001. He has taught various courses, including research methods, social marketing, health communication, and definitely has played a key role in curriculum development at CARIMAC. So with over 25 years of experience, he has consulted for and conducted research and training with Caribbean-based agencies such as SEDIMA and the OECS. He has led surveys and message testing studies on climate change, HIV awareness, human rights, and public transportation. Additionally, he has served on multiple boards and committees, including the Creative Production and Training Center, and is an editorial board member for the Social Marketing Quarterly and Health Marketing Quarterly academic journals. Dr. White also co-authored the book, Still on Air, Producing Television in Small Markets, and has experience in television production. So I want to turn you over at this time to former director, Dr. Livingston White, who will take us through what we expect to be a very engaging and enlightening discussion. Dr. White?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Prendergast. Thank you, Dr. Prendergast, for introducing me. Ever since I've been associated with CARIMAC, I have always sensed that there was a strong development ethos underlying the curriculum and the work we do. The phrase, the role of media and communication in national development, was one that would often be repeated in compulsory courses like CAP 1 and CAP 2, Communication Analysis and Planning. When I was a student, CAP 1 was a compulsory course taught in the second year of the 3-year degree program. Every student had to take CAP 1, and CAP 2 was an optional final year course. When I became a faculty member, it became even more apparent that my favorite course from my student days, Communication Analysis and Planning, was a staple in CARIMAC's curriculum. And I will tell you how much it was my favorite course. In final year, when we had to choose between a research paper, Caribbean Studies, and CAP 2, I chose CAP 2. And in my year, I was the only student who did CAP 2 for my final year project. And I did it because, in addition to the research component, there was a practical component where you had to implement a project demonstrating how communication could support development objectives. Now, jump to 2001. I showed up at CARIMAC expecting to be assigned teaching in television production because, as you heard from Patrick, I had experience in television and I did my undergraduate specialization in television. But to my surprise, I was assigned to teach courses in social marketing, research methods, and communication analysis and planning. And I've witnessed over the years the pressure to move our curriculum into the more commercially driven forms of communication, you know, the advertising, the sales promotion. But luckily, we have been able to maintain the development ethos with the presence of courses like communication analysis and planning, intervention design, and social marketing. The introduction of our integrated marketing communication degrees was a response to this pressure to make our graduates even more marketable beyond the traditional advertising and public relations workspaces for the CARIMAC graduate. The introduction of programs like Communication for Social and Behaviour Change was also another attempt to keep within our curriculum the development ethos, emphasizing the role of media in national development. So today, in recognition of CARIMAC's 50th anniversary, we pause to reflect on shifts in development communication from traditional communication planning to social marketing and other approaches. When current director, Dr. Prendergast, asked me to plan the session, I immediately felt we had to do something to recognize the course Communication Analysis and Planning, CAP, as CARIMAC's contribution to national development in the region. So to help us reflect, we welcome our guests. You've met them already, Dr. Lovette Byfield, Janet Morrison, and Gail Hoad. Lovette and Janet are graduates of the first cohort of the Masters in Communication for Social and Behaviour Change, who have continued their association with us by lecturing part-time. And Gail Hoad also lectured with CARIMAC in our courses, CAP and Intervention Design, and has many years of experience working on various development communication projects across the Caribbean region. So you have all worked in communication for various projects and institutions ranging from the public sector, the donor community, and the private sector. For this first question, I invite you to answer in the context of where your main work focus has been. Lovette, government, public sector; Janet, advertising, private sector; and Gail, donor sector. How has the approach to development communication changed over the years in your sector?
Okay. All right, so let me start off. I've worked for years in the government sector, primarily in the Ministry of Health, or within health, I should say, in the areas of HIV/AIDS, sexual and reproductive health, a little bit in nutrition, and in family planning. That's my latest. And just from where I started some time ago, I would say that there has been some significant change in the approach to development communication. I can recall the days when the focus was primarily on IEC, or information, education, and communication. And the issue was we needed to share information. We needed to give information to the population. And you might have, I think what resulted from that was that you would note that there might be high awareness that we learned earlier on in HIV. There would be high awareness, but there was no attending behavior change, or there was nothing that suggested that persons were taking on the particular messages and information that you were sharing. So we have moved from that top-down, expert-driven kind of approach, which says we give you the information and you follow through, to where now we're actually saying you need to engage the audience a lot more. And I think what has been so critical for this is that the research which informed those very early days of programming that said persons were not hearing you, persons were not internalizing the message, there's no difference there. And so we have seen a greater shift to social and behavior change, to behavior change communication, and also to social marketing. And I think perhaps we have noted a difference because more persons have entered into the area of communication, entered into the workspace, that have training and have been exposed to the various courses here at CARIMAC. And so when you come into that space, there is the need to shift because you want to see the change. And because you also are now marrying more, or recognizing the need to get the information, get the evidence, and then to do the programming accordingly. So from that perspective, I would say I've noticed significant change in the government sector. And you would note that outside of health, in some of the other areas as well, you will note that persons it's now becoming more important to engage the audience as it relates to whatever programming that needs to be promoted, so that persons can in fact get a better sense as to why we're developing and what it is that we're doing. So there's a definite shift, I think.
Thanks, Lovette. Janet, over to you.
Okay, so my background is, I'm kind of a hybrid. Yeah, I have a very strong background in production and production management and creative development. So that would be the implementation side. Also in terms of strategy and developing strategies, marketing strategies, etc. That would be the advertising and marketing side. And what I've found over the years is that the understanding of, the term general public, I hate that phrase, like, really, the general public, there's no such audience, right? Like the general public, because we're not a homogeneous group of people. And I think that one of the greatest differences or developments has been the understanding of how marketing works when it comes to segmentation of audiences. And I think the development communication has really taken that on very seriously. And that is so important, because what advertising and marketers do is that they go where the audience consumes media and how they consume media. And I think that is integral to people buying into the persuasive aspect of things. And so I think that that has been one of the most important approaches that have been subsumed into the development communication. Also, the understanding of the importance of participation in the development of these interventions, these communication interventions, has also for me been a really important development. Because as Lovie says, Lovette, Dr. Byfield says, we call her Lovie in the industry. What happens is that, people, you're teaching people something, you're telling them something, right? If you really want persons to change their behaviors, you have to be where they are. You have to meet them at a point of understanding where they're coming from, right? And I think when you engage them and they participate in the process of the development of the communication, it can be as simple as focus groups. That's the starting point. Let me hear what you're saying, how you feel about this. That to me is one, also another area that has been very important.
Okay, thanks, Janet. And Gail, let's hear your perspective on the shifts in the donor community sector.
All right, thanks, Livingston. I think for the international development partners, what we are seeing is definitely, we have been seeing for quite a few years now, a shift in communication, in how they approach communication for development. So looking at communication and its value added in a much wider sense than beyond just external relations, public relations, visibility, and promotion. I think we've been moving away from that narrow understanding of communication into the broader sense, the engagement, the participation, etc. I think that has been happening across organizations. What has also been happening with that shift, however, is that different entities have sort of taken a different direction, depending. So for some, the whole thing of communication for development has gone into social and behavior change, specifically a big focus on social and behavior change and understanding communication for development as primarily SBC. For others, especially our development banks, behavioral economics has been a sort of narrowing of focus for them, right? But I think there are some things that they have in common. The evidence-based approach that was mentioned earlier by both Janet and Lovette, the need for data. And we see this not only in the way they operate and they run their programs, but also in the way they fund government and civil society programs. So they are asking more for KAPs, knowledge, attitude, and practices surveys. They're asking for the focus group discussions. They're asking for data to inform and to drive the interventions which they're funding. So that is another important trend. Another thing is the public engagement, as Janet mentioned, understanding that communities, people on the ground have to be a part of the solution, have to be engaged in the search for solutions and in the communication interventions. That is also an important point. And I think finally for them is also understanding that the change that needs to take place very often when we're talking about social and behavior change, it could be a change at community, as Lovette mentioned, looking at HIV, trying to figure out what makes people change, but also understanding that there are gaps on the institutional side, and that sometimes development communication now has to investigate institutions and systems and look at change there as well. So I think those are some of the things that our IDPs, our international development partners, have been looking at in terms of their approach to communication for development.
Thanks for that. I'm happy to see how, each of you have touched on the need for the research in the area, how research has also been there to inform the planning and evaluation of development communication interventions. And I know it has been a challenge to get those research budgets in and to get the research done to inform the development communication planning. So my next question is, what challenges have you encountered in shifting from traditional communication planning methods to newer approaches?
Well, I would want to start with saying, how do you, first of all, sensitize your managers, your leaders, the executives within the various organizations as to what is it that you're doing here? Because sometimes the concern is we haven't seen anything, we're not seeing the media activities, we're not having the launch, we're not actually seeing the press release, and we're saying, okay, we need to understand that there's a broader context and we have to understand it first before we start with doing the posters, doing all of those other traditional things. So the implementation of new approaches and the support from the leaders, I think, has been a major challenge. And so how you, in fact, advocate upwards to getting these persons to understand. And then, because you have to do a wider, more comprehensive response that takes in not just the media channels, but also what's happening in a wider context, the wider environment that the person's operating, and all of those other points and stakeholders that you have to touch base with. There's also the big thing about how do you build the capacity of your team members in-house to understand. First of all, do you have a team in-house? Let's start there, because at one stage, this would be the responsibility of a solo person, or maybe if you're lucky, two persons.
Right.
But there's a need now to say there's a wider approach. There are a number of other things to take into consideration. You need a research, you need your media planner, you need your material development specialist, you need your person to be out there in the community, you need your researcher. So you need a bigger team for communication. So building the capacity of who is there, or how do you get a team in place in order to understand. And then there's also, I would call it the readiness for change. And if we mention innovations and moving in that particular direction, how ready are we in terms of as a whole sector for changing the approaches which are expected, which you would like to take on? And I think if you go into the diffusion of innovation, you're going to encounter all of those, those who are going to run with it. You perhaps may find that perhaps in some of our sectors, there are a number of other persons who are towards the other end. So how do you prepare and move persons along that continuum for change is also a big challenge.
You're speaking about the adopter categories there, the early innovators.
Oh, yes, the early
the laggards, yes.
The laggards. So maybe
Yes.
some of them may be towards the laggards or the late majority, and you might have some innovators, but you are blessed when you have innovators to run with you in this particular direction.
And that underscores another challenge we share just before we get to you, Janet, the matter of time. Fact that, behavior change will take some time. It's not the immediate results that we're always going to get, and how do you convince the persons who have to sign off on the budgets that this will require some time to see the change. Janet?
That's when you took the words out of my mouth. That's what I was going to say. I think that the crux of the matter is that the people want immediacy. They want this thing to happen now, right? And there's not that understanding that you're changing individuals' behavior, which is informed by their whole life, what they've learned, what they've been, what they've been taught, the environment they're in, So it takes time. And that understanding, I honestly feel that the new director has to find a course especially in public sector, MDAs, those same managers and program people who that Lovette mentioned, just for them to get even the basic understanding of how behavior change works and managing the expectations of even those in a supervisory position to them. I think that's going to be really critical because I'm on the other side. So as a consultant, I come in and you know, the barriers are there because there is that lack of understanding. You come up with a strategy that needs capacity to implement, and there's no capacity. The person saying, well, you know, it's me one on the project, you know, so, and you know that me one can't do it. So, so I think there needs to be an understanding. I think there is absolutely room for something that CARIMAC can do in this area.
Thanks for that suggestion, Janet, and we'll take some more like that towards the end of the discussion. Gail, your challenges in the donor sector.
I think Lovette and Janet have summed them up. I mean, time, definitely, when we're looking at the approaches that we want to adopt in development communication and for social and behavior change. And the buy-in at the highest level are definitely two of the biggest barriers we face. And I think linked to those two is that we have to also understand that for better or for worse, we are in a time where people want to see things now. There is no patience. We're in a time that we're in a very impatient environment, right? People have no time. People want to see everything now from the top to the bottom. People want to see results. Now they expect to see change now. And they expect things to be immediate and automatic, right? So there is a need, I think, as Janet said, in whatever approach we take in addressing these challenges, I need to understand that we are in this time of impatience, but that we are dealing with human beings, and what we really need most of all in looking at human beings and our behavior is time and patience. That is what we require, time and patience and understanding. And that is what development communication is really about at its core.
Yeah, it's a matter of perspective, being able to see the big picture, because just looking at you, Lovette, I'm almost certain that we've spent the last 30 years responding to HIV. You know, you have to look at it over a period of 30 years to see the work that we've done. It can't be this one campaign that ran for 8 months. It's more looking at the bigger picture of the program, the context in which the campaigning has to happen, the communication for behavior change has to happen. And, you know, at CARIMAC, we've always taught, you know, in CAP that you have the policy framework, then programs and projects, and then your campaigning is happening within that context. And so, Lovette, for you in the government sector, how has the government been able to balance policy-driven communication with the need for audience engagement and behavior change?
Well, I think this has been a real challenge because it's important, as we have said, that when you're looking at policy-driven communication, it must be clear and effective, and you must be able to communicate the policies and the procedures to ensure understanding and compliance. However, I find that sometimes you in the sector, a policy has been completed, and what you would want to do is to get persons to begin, you want to implement, but you would not necessarily have prepared your population. You would not have engaged the population. What do they understand? Do they understand the impact of the policy? What will this really mean for me? What will it mean for the population? And so you find that you might have to look at phased implementation. That's what I would want to think that may have happened in some instances. And in some instances, there might have been wholesale implementation and you had to pull back, right? Because let us think about an example of what happened in our transport sector with the decision around the car seat for the taxis. And you were beginning to think that this should have happened. But what would this mean for the taxi operators, for the persons who were traveling? So haven't looked at it, and you have to be prepared to get the feedback and get the opinion, get public opinion, and be responsive to public opinion. But sometimes there's an urgency. Sometimes there's a tension between what it is that needs to happen now to indicate that we are changing, to indicate that we are moving in a particular direction. And so therefore, you're going to run out there, start your promotion, start your campaign, you know, with your messages and all of that. But then there is no readiness, and then you find that you have to step back. So in instances, the phased approach is important, but also I think there must be some flexibility and a willingness to review and revise the policies or aspects of the policies as you go along. And I think it is critical again to come back to this point. You have to spend time with the audience to do the research, do the audience engagement, do the audience segmentation, and then look at how you will in fact communicate as effective a way what is the change that we require. So we had some good examples. I think perhaps if you want to look at the plastic ban, it may give you an idea that when you said let us take the ban off, place the ban on plastic bags and straws, that certainly was an easier way to go than to say place the ban on plastic bottles, which would have had significant implications for the manufacturers and all of the investments in those particular areas. So I think that we may have some lessons, but I think it's also critical to recognize that you have to ensure that the impact of the policy on the population, on the particular audience is considered, and then you do your implementation accordingly.
And so moving on to Janet and the private sector, how has the private sector's approach to persuasive communication, in advertising, sales promotion, influenced development communication?
I think in terms of the research which we have covered already, but another area that I think it has been very important is the production values when implementing the material. We had a very staid approach, shall we? I'm trying to be diplomatic here. A very staid approach to government campaigns originally, because naturally where they were coming from in terms of the kind of didactic approach, where they're teaching
authoritative
you
voice.
You must do this, that, right. So it required a certain environment and a certain tone and a certain what have you. But I think over the years, we've realized that, again, persuasion is, you have to look at the heart of people's lives, the lived experience, the culture, what engages them on the ground. And so advertisers locked onto that very early and have brought that into how they produce material, the videos, the jingles, the drama, the radio spots that are basically little dramas in themselves, because that is who in our setting, that is who we are. And so I think that those elements, those production values have really influenced how we implement our campaigns for development communication, for behavior change communication. I think it's a very important.
I mean, it is the basis of many of the newer approaches that we now teach at CARIMAC, the social marketing, the communication for behavioral impact, COMBI, borrowing from commercial marketing and applying it to social behaviors and, socially beneficial practices. You think of things like media buying, media planning, I was, happy to see how with pinch, leave, and inch, roll, Lovette, when we did that campaign, the sort of creative media buying that went into the placement of the messages and the budget to place that campaign. You'd never expect that to be happening in a public sector type campaign.
Absolutely.
And so in more of these campaigns designed to promote, socially beneficial behaviors, we're seeing the investment. It's a little bit better now than it was before, okay? But we still have some challenges. And, we want to move on to Gail with the donor community. How have the donor agencies integrated communication into their development projects?
As I said,
go ahead.
Okay. As I had said before, I mean, the good thing is that with the growing recognition of the importance of development communication, that has then trickled down into what is funded, right? So funding research, very important. The importance of research, the fact that they are asking whether it be government agencies or NGOs that are funded to do this research, to provide evidence upon which interventions or programs are developed, that I think is an important thing. I don't think it would have, sometimes it just wouldn't happen without that insistence from the donor agency that there should be a survey done, that there should be some sort of qualitative research, some data gathering. So I think that is critical in terms of funding. There is also the move as well in terms of social and behavior change communication, the fact of moving away from, as I think I'd mentioned before, not just looking at the beneficiary community, the target community, but understanding that development is a holistic matter, right? So it is about all the players involved. And so it is that understanding that communication can help you understand the issue better and also address it better, in whether it is through your service providers who may have certain gaps, or through the community, or even through the higher up, the political directorate. I think the donor community has helped that understanding as well in terms of what they fund and what they ask for.
And really, the point you're making is, communication is not just about the messaging going in media, but it's the communication among the development partners, between the partners, between the different stakeholders. Lovette, I know a big strategy in your work has been the outreach. Outreach officers and interpersonal communication, this idea that there's communication at the administrative level to mobilize different organizations, the various committees, bringing in multidisciplinary expertise to address an issue. I don't know if you could share some examples of the importance of that blend of different forms of communication for development, where it's not just mass mediated, but there's also the interpersonal. And let's not forget social media that we have today.
Yes, I think Livingston, you touched on a very good point, because for us here, especially as it relates to sexual and reproductive health, and yes, HIV in particular, we have in HIV used our personal sellers. Well, personal sellers is from Combi, but basically it's interpersonal communication. Our community peer educators were critical in taking the information to the target population, to the populations in different settings. So whether they were at parties, whether they were in far-flung communities, whether they were right here in urban locations that might have had issues around violence, they took the information to the persons. But critical to this was how you would have equipped and trained your persons with the ability to have conversations. So it's not didactic, it's how we are going to engage the population to have the conversation. In addition to that, though, there were critical persons that had to be engaged in order to get access to the population or to facilitate the development of policies and programs at other levels. So our stakeholder engagement, especially around the need for advocacy, our work with the civil society organizations, and the particular roles that they play in bringing to the fore some of the critical information and issues which had to be dealt with, that perhaps within the sector yourself you could not have been able to carry this so forcefully. And it was also critical for us to recognize that there were other sectors. So what we went to was a multi-sectoral approach, where we recognized the need for the involvement of the Ministry of Education. That strong programs with the Ministry of Education, that was critical. In the early stage, we were with the Ministry of Tourism. So your evidence was showing you where your challenges would have been and who your partners should have been. So you were with tourism, you were with education, you were with Ministry of Labor and Social Security, looking at what are the laws and what are the barriers, because you were looking at issues around stigma and discrimination and how you would have moved up within those settings that it would have, the evidence would have pointed that you needed to get into those locations, have your persons taking the information from within and being able to advocate for changes within the particular sector. So for us, those have been some of the critical approaches that we have used.
Janet, Gail, any critical approaches you want to share from your particular sectors that you think have helped to strengthen the work in development communication across the region?
I just wanted to put in a word for consultations. When we hear that word consultations, It sounds very, you know, political consultations and business consultation. But let me tell you, consultations are a wonderful approach to communication, especially, and funnily enough, outside of the normal, what we see as consultations, right? Consultations with the community, right? Some people call it town hall. But when you have a group and smaller than a town hall of persons, community-based organizations, you know, small NGOs, parent teachers association, those are all small community groups that if you bring them in early into the conversation around the issue, they can then form coalitions within their own groups and within their at their levels. And that understanding is communicated much more easily than any grand campaign you could possibly have. So once you have that buy-in on the ground, it makes your job is to layer it now, right? And to fan it out, because you have that solid foundation within the community. And so I really believe, I mean, I did work for the Deaf Association once. And one of the things we did was something for employment of persons who are hard of hearing or deaf, you know? And the interesting thing was that you had all these big companies, small companies, who never even thought of employing someone who was deaf, because it was just out of their, you know. And once because we made sure that a deaf person was on the consultation. So you were sitting in with the CEO, the factory worker, the whoever in the consultation, and that understanding, you just saw people's, you know, minds begin to open, and you know, so it was really a good thing to watch what could be achieved from a consultation. So we don't have
Or a conversation. I liked how you move from consultation to
right.
conversation. Yes.
Right. It's that's what it is. So, you know, yeah, those different approaches. There's so many different things that you can do for interpersonal communication that works to help to build that foundation that you need, and then you support it with your mass media and your other media network. Yeah.
It's all about participation, you know. Development
Participation.
involves people, and how can we engage people, the conversations. Gail,
Right.
from the donor sector.
I think, yes, definitely the consultation, the conversation, the participation. And I think one of the most valuable things in supporting communication is also facilitating people's voices, right? Not in a tokenistic way, but actually having facilitating processes that allow people's voices to be heard. That is, and I think that is at the heart of communication for development. All we've been talking about, the research is about getting information from our stakeholders and our target communities. The engagement is about that. The consultation is about that. But we must have processes that actually allow people's voices to genuinely come through. Sometimes it is about facilitating spaces and platforms. Sometimes it is about capacity building, which is very important for voice. We think about capacity building as training, but capacity building is also for voice, for allowing people's voices to come through. So I think having people's voices, ensuring that people's voices are heard is really, really very important. And again, especially because we are in a very noisy and impatient age. So that function of communication is really critical, and it is such an important part of communication for development.
And it's almost as if we have to get creative with the research. It's not always going to be the big national household survey or your formal focus groups and surveys and established methodologies. We have to get creative and go underground and reach the people and connect with the people in whatever creative ways to get that data, to get them involved in the change that is to take place. I want to shift a little bit to the student of CARIMAC and the curriculum, within the context of preparing the CARIMAC student for the job market and keeping the CARIMAC curriculum up to date. What are the biggest opportunities you would say for development communication moving forward?
Well, let me start it. I think that what is critical for CARIMAC graduate coming out, or how you prepare them, is what are the research skills that you're equipping them with? And to just reinforce the point you made, because I made a note of the fact that they don't have to be big research projects. Giving them the basic skills as to how to conduct a focus group discussion, how to integrate it into your particular program or activity is critical. So you don't always have to have a big budget, and it takes up a lot of time. But the research skills are, and an appreciation of the need to engage the audience. Because as you mentioned earlier, Gail, and I just wanted to touch back on a little bit, the engagement of the audience also contributes to the sustainability of your program within that you're trying to develop and to ensure that it continues after you have moved on. And then I think another important thing would be preparation of budget. We need some budget management, budget preparation. We need to get real examples as to how you actually do a budget. And you see the basic things around media buying and positioning, but also recognizing that the other aspects of it are likely to cost you. Well, how can you ensure that your budget does not become so high or large that it becomes a big barrier, but in fact that you don't miss the critical inputs, but that is also important. And the advocacy skills. They will have to know how to advocate. They will have to know how to advocate and how to engage the stakeholders and build partnerships. And I would like to say also, maybe it's not so much for the graduates, but more for CARIMAC. How do you, I'm going to use the word prime, but perhaps I'm thinking, how do you increase the appreciation of the social sector, of the need for a more comprehensive response in communication, development communication, an appreciation for this, so that when your graduates actually go out there, they are not breaking ground, but they recognize, because you would have already done your preparation with the sector, that this is what is needed in order to move forward. But it's also creating a balance. What can I do right now? What will require more time? And then therefore I can have a greater response within the sector to the particular issues.
Janet, any additional opportunities?
What I would love to see is more hybrids like me. I fell into it by circumstances of life. But based on where our budgets are going in terms of funding that's available, and that funding might not be available, I really would like to see us try to build out persons who can implement as well as strategize. So you have a person who can come up with a communication strategy, right? Which in behavior change communication is everything. But then you're also run into the problem of who can implement this strategy. Yeah, I think we have a little gap there. Yes, there are people who can run off and do a 30-second jingle, or who can do but who can implement the different, understand how to roll out the strategy and to implement the strategy, and inject some creative juices into the implementation as well. It's almost as if I know it's a bit, because not every person can write copy or, but we need to encourage the creative, to what do you call it now, to join up with the strategies for, just from a very practical point of view. The funding is not there to get somebody who can write the communication strategy and the communication officer who is going to implement, and the person, the money is not there. So I would really love to see how, if CARIMAC can look at seeing how we can create more of that body of persons.
Without it getting into the me one approach, where it's just
Oh,
one person
yes.
for everything.
Yes, the me one. Yeah, this is a problem.
Yes.
It's not, yeah.
So you still have to keep your teams, relatively small, but still have a team that is talented enough
knowledge
to
and
multitask.
yes, the task, yeah.
And Gail, your opportunities.
Okay. So opportunities, I think one, I agree with Lovette in terms of persons who can do research, who can gather evidence, who understand that. I think one of the things I would say about that particular communication for development practitioner or development communication practitioner, when we say what type of person it needs to be, it may sound like it's sort of outside of CARIMAC's remit, but a communicator is really somebody who is able to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And an effective communicator you cannot have an effective communicator without empathy. That, I think, those are two critical skills for no matter where this communicator is working, whether it is in media, it is in development work, etc. These are two critical skills. And even in identifying somebody, like the practitioner that Janet mentioned, somebody who can do, those are the things that you need. You need somebody who understands that communication is not just about speaking, but more importantly, it's about listening. And it is, as social marketing says, it is the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, understand them, and then therefore be able to effectively work with them towards solutions. That is the hardest thing to teach, right? But it's something that can be cultivated, whether through example, through encouragement, through demonstration. And that is what is going to make or break a good practitioner in this field. So I think that is what I'd say.
Thanks for that. And, as part of CARIMAC's 50th, and that's individuals who've had a teaching relationship with CARIMAC, how would you each rate CARIMAC's contribution to the practice of development communication in the region? I know that we can declare that the CARIMAC brand for development communication is CAP. The CARIMAC student will always be able to talk about the CAP course that they did, and everybody knows CAP to be communication analysis and planning. But how would you rate CARIMAC's contribution to the practice of development communication in the region?
Well, I would want to say that CARIMAC has been responsive. They have seen what's happening, and they have at different times they have put in different programs that can that would address the whole issue of communication for development or development communication. I look at the Masters in Communication for Social and Behavior Change, which we were a part of, as you mentioned. But I've also been able to lecture in that course. And what I've found is that there's the students, there's a more diverse group of students who are taking the course. And when I say it's really different, because at one stage you might have found persons who had a first degree in communication who wanted to do a master's, but now persons are coming from many different types of background, many different kinds of sectors, who recognize the need for what needs to happen in their particular sector and as it relates to development. So I think the intervention design course that I also taught for a period, that is also helping to prepare persons. And that introduction of IMC and also of COMBI is also preparing persons a lot more in order to respond to what are the real needs there. However, I think that there needs to be just a little bit more around, is a hybrid, is a practitioner that can really mix the social marketing, the communication, who can really understand and put it together. Because in recent times, when we have tried to hire consultants in my tenure at the Family Planning Board, we have had to spend a lot of time just preparing persons as to what exactly we would need before you get to the message development. That is critical.
Yeah.
Okay. Janet, your
no.
rating.
I'm just dittoing everything that Lovette said.
And even from the advertising sector, when you were in advertising.
Oh yes, it has really made an impact on my sector for sure. I can't tell you the number of persons who have come from CARIMAC into advertising and marketing. Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, you know, it filled a real gap. It filled a real gap, and they have benefited from it. I think the IMC program was a good program. I still would like to see more practicum in terms of production. You can't get around it. I mean, yes, there are, you know, nowadays people are able to use certain apps and tools and what have you, but it is both art and science. And we have to get back to understanding the science of how it works and how people consume media, how they understand messaging. So I really would like to see more practicum there. But without a doubt, CARIMAC has been has had a real impact, certainly in advertising. Definitely behavior change.
Gail, the donor sector.
I think working in the donor sector, I mean, one thing I can say is that when organizations, when international development partners are looking around for regional expertise in social and behavior change, as in the Caribbean, CARIMAC is it. It's not as if there is anything else. It is CARIMAC. CARIMAC is what is recognized when they do their research. CARIMAC is what comes up. CARIMAC is what is identified. So much so I think that, I mean, what often happens, however, is that the expectation of looking at the CARIMAC program and the expectation of the human capacity to deliver that from CARIMAC is often, it is unrealistic from their end, right? Because when they look in and see how small a team or how small the team really is, etc. But looking at the program, looking at what it offers, looking at the training programs, CARIMAC is what is recognized as the regional expertise in social and behavior change communication. I think what we probably need to do, and I guess Livingston, you're going to ask about recommendations and so on, but I think we need to capitalize more on that and we need to leverage it a bit more. I think that is it. But it is clear that it has broken ground in the region and it's still recognized as the main resource in this area.
Thanks for those ratings. We want to take some questions and comments from the chat. I notice persons have been posing questions. Patrick, could you assist me here? I think I see a question from Andrew Ladley. Let me go ahead and read this. Here's a question from Andrew Ladley. Are project managers now considering communication interventions from the early stages of planning as a tool to demonstrate impact and result which donors require? Are project managers now considering communication interventions from the early stages of planning as a tool to demonstrate impact and result which donors require?
I think, right.
Go ahead, Gail.
So I would say yes, and that may be a challenge. So yes, project managers are looking at communication as a way of showcasing what has been done, right? What in communication for development, however, what we are advocating and what we hope they would do is look at communication as part of their toolkit, as a cross-cutting tool, as a tool that can help them look and investigate issues. That the research that we do will not only inform communication work, but can inform the wider development work. It is about the people that you are trying to reach, the stakeholders that you want to engage, etc. So yes, it is definitely recognized. People want to see comms. They want to be able to say, we showcase their results. They are looking at it in that way. What we are saying, however, is that there is a broader role for communication. It is about understanding the issue. It is about helping you develop your project even better, helping you develop your approaches and your implementation outside of comms. That is the value added of communication that C4D speaks to.
Lovette, Janet, any addition? Project
I just
manager.
wanted to add,
consider-
I just wanted to add though that or just to I agree, I'm in agreement with what Gail has said, but also just to recognize that your broadest project is looking at communication within your broadest project, is looking at your indicators is going beyond number of spots and number of posters and number of special events. What it's looking at is what is the reported behavior change? How likely is that? The number of stakeholders that you have engaged, the advocacy that you have promoted as part of your overall project, which has seen a beginning or of a policy being developed, to see a policy being formulated. It is also looking at what kind of strategic framework has come out of this that pull your partners together so that they're now addressing the wider developmental issue of this individual in this context, who not just not teaching her how to wash her hands, but the fact that you're now engaging who provides the water, you're looking at the other environmental issues, and those will be the critical markers of your, as a project manager.
Supporting infrastructure.
Yeah.
Supporting infrastructure, yes.
I
know the behavior has to happen.
Yes, and looking at the structural barriers and seeking to address these as well. So it's a much more, it's development, it's the individual within that space and how you're impacting that person.
Janet, anything to add to this one?
No, sir.
Thank you for that. Perhaps you can take on this one. How, from Doreen, have social media influencers caused any shifts in the way you mainstream communicators do your work?
Yes and no. Obviously, because your research would have told you that X influencer is, important for this particular target audience if you're going to be using an influencer. But there are many things that you have to consider. You don't just jump and engage an influencer because they have how many million people liking them or whatever. Are they in tune with your development issue? Because that can work against you. Are they, and are they engaged on the topic? So it may very well be that they are, very popular and so forth, but they may not be interested in your topic at all in terms of them being interested in the money you're going to give them. But are they going to now push that development issue? Are they going to engage people in conversations around it? Because that is how you get the ball rolling, the ball coming down the hill, gathering moss or whatever. So, it's a two-edged sword. It can be very effective. Certainly has been effective on some issues, but you really have to think carefully about how you're going to engage that influencer and how that influencer is going to be really used for your development issue.
Even before social media influencers, we've always had to be careful how we use the personality approach and the testimonial and the role model. Lovette, I know you can share stories from your campaign. You use these real life individuals to be spokespersons for your campaign, and then things happen and you have to pull them from the campaign.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So the
Lovette?
consistency. So the consistent. So I was about to make that point because I said that dilemma we face from when we were saying we were going to use entertainers, popular
Yeah.
entertainers. And
Right.
you have to be careful because the message you know, Jamaica is small. People know a lot about you more than you know about yourself. So you have to ensure that when you are promoting a message, that the persons are going to say, how credible a source are you for this
Yeah.
message? And
Right.
so therefore, it has been one of those things that we have avoided some of the more popular entities. But as you have said, Janet, we have done the research. We know that some of the social media influencers are critical. And so we have used them to take messages in particular settings, but not
Right.
necessarily to be your ongoing spokesperson. I
Right.
think perhaps on the international scene, you might have someone who has been very popular in the issues around human trafficking, and that is a message that you can take and carry. But I'm just wondering sometimes if some of our persons would be able to engage in some of those personal lifestyle issues that may present a challenge within a context like ours.
Any additions, Gail, about the
No,
social media influencers and shifts in
nothing.
development communication?
No,
We just
nothing
continue to be careful.
exactly.
Any final questions from the chat? I'm scrolling down. Okay, Andrew Ladley again. Is there a
I'm
role?
seeing one, Dr. White, from Andrew Ladley.
Yes.
Is there a role for communication for development professionals within the context of recent decisions to halt certain development funding? What should C4D practitioners be considering in terms of approach right now?
So the funding, which was mentioned earlier, funding for development, as we know, it is clearly changing, right? Things are changing and changing faster than we could ever imagine. So things are changing fast, and it would have implications not only for C4D practitioners, but possibly for most development practitioners, right? Sources of funding are drying up. Funding is being shifted to other spaces. Multilateralism is sort of very shaky right now. So for the C4D practitioner, I mean, the important thing to think of, as with any profession and any professional, is what is the value added of my work? How do I demonstrate the value added of my profession, my approach, and myself as a professional? And this is important. If it is that our donors are not providing as much money, there definitely will not be as much need for visibility and promotion. However, the very human, very real development needs remain, whether or not there is funding. The need to understand them remains, whether or not there is funding. And the need to address them remains, whether or not there is funding. The need to help people, the need to engage with individuals remains. So we are hoping that at CARIMAC, we are not simply preparing people to go out and get a job and get a lot of money, a job that has a lot of money, but we are preparing professionals, C4D professionals, communication development professionals, social and behavior change specialists who are there to address these very real needs, which will not change whether or not they're being addressed now by governments or by civil society groups or by community groups. They will still need to be addressed. These problems still need to be addressed. So yes, there is always need for the communication for development approach, because communication, the very heart of what communication is a critical part of the solution in looking at these issues.
And it opens up for creative thinking. We now have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what cost efficiencies can I build into this campaign? How can I, you just have to wheel and come again. Because as Gail says, the problems aren't leaving us, right? So we have to find our own solutions, right?
And it's almost as if, the point you've been making earlier, the advocacy skills to advocate for the importance of including communication, because I've been on projects where I've had to convince the planners and the funders to put a line item in there for communication. As much as the project is very technical and the funding priority was to buy equipment, and because that was more important, but we still needed to communicate about the processes and what was going to be happening in that particular social issue. So the ability to convince those who will fund, or wherever the development dollar is going to come from, taxpayers' money, corporate, wherever it's coming from, foundations, just the ability to be able to justify why communication should not be cut from the budget. Okay?
Yes,
I think
yes.
it's very important. Lovette?
And you
that
touched
goes
on the
back-
partnerships. That's going to be
Yes.
critical.
Yeah. And it goes back to the need for the evidence, the research. You have to use that as a critical part of advocating and ensuring that you get that understanding. So I think it's also tying back to as well Janet's earlier point about us, the need to ensure that not just our graduates, not just our students are here, but how do we engage the sector leaders? Because part of the advocacy is that we might make it easier for them if their leaders understand what it is that they're doing. Yes, but we also have to be able to provide the data to support what it is that we are requesting.
Dr. Prendergast has some comments. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah,
Doc.
thanks, Dr. White. I'm not seeing any other comment now, but I think you're also picking up on them. I just want to make a few remarks, just listening here. Well, first of all, as people have been mentioning in the online space, that this is truly an esteemed panel. I mean, we're so proud to have such an esteemed panel of CARIMAC alumni and educators in the same space, discussing what they have really identified as a very valuable, insightful, and importantly, timely discussion around this particular topic. So, I mean, I really would just love to, first of all, thank you for responding to the invitation to lead this conversation, and certainly, to Lovette and Janet and Gail for keeping everybody on their toes and keeping it was really very insightful, and to bring your own reflection and insight to the experience. I was happy in the way Dr. Byfield started by recognizing something that I've always wanted to hear somebody say something about, and that is that the work that we would have been doing at CARIMAC through through basically all of these different ways in which we have been responding to the changes in the field, and seeing that making a positive contribution to the public education space. We've really evolved, and I was happy that you were able to draw attention to that is a real positive shift that we would have seen in public education. I want to also make a point. Gail mentioned the whole thing of behavioral economics, and I will tell you this: we've been talking about development economics, development historian, and all of this. But this whole thing, this whole area, there is some work and some new scholars emerging in the behavioral economic space that we at CARIMAC will have to embrace and bring on board to help us to make some of those additional shifts that we need to make in terms of the recommendations that you have been sharing with us. You know me already. There is no way I could hear talk about bringing, creating opportunities, facilitating people's voices. Once you mention consultation and participation, you're going to get me going. And it's important for us to remind people that participation in the process is not just about turning up for a consultation, but really and truly engaging people at all levels of the decision-making process. Because sometimes we're throwing a consultation just to say we did it. But the truth is that for you to get to the point, as Lovette mentioned, of true sustainability, if you don't engage them beyond just that initial consultation, we're bound to have problems. So I was happy that you were able to bring that to the table. And I will say this, I mean, it's a lot to think about. Certainly, we keep talking about former directors and new director and what may be within CARIMAC's ability to respond. But the capacity building issue is real. And we're really going to have to do something about that. I like the proposal around it, looking at policy and leadership, getting to the policy and leadership level, Lovette, and engaging them in ways where they can actually have a better understanding of what we need to do. You didn't put it this way, all of you, but I actually wrote down something that says developing comprehensive strategic communication, planning, and implementation. And certainly to get people to start to think, not just in terms of what they bring to the creative space, but to also think innovation for sustainability. Because, that for me, I think, and the last thing I will say is, Gail, you and I are going to have some serious conversation, because the way you have put it, I mean, we are in a time of impatience and noise. And the work that we do in behavior change communication, the work that we do in development communication requires time and patience. And it is not easy, but I'm one of those who you've heard me say it, culture is something that is constructed. And if we want to make a change, we have to also give ourselves time and really and truly have the patience to work through this. So, I really want to thank the panelists. This has been very enlightening for me. I'm really very happy, and I'm, going to just turn it back to Dr. White so that he can do his wrap up.
Yes.
Thank you so much, guys, and thank everybody for
our pleasure, Dr. Prendergast. You talk about time. CARIMAC has been around for 50 years. Here's to another 50. Happy 50th anniversary, CARIMAC. We continue to inspire, our regional, presence in impacting, the legacy of impact, bringing that impact across the region in development communication. I think that's really the CARIMAC legacy of impact. And, we've been doing it for 50 years. And I think out of today's discussion, as I ask each panelist to give one parting final bit of advice to students going forward and so on, how they should approach, what advice would you give these young professionals entering the field of development communications, as we think of another 50 years of CARIMAC and, acting on some of these recommendations that have been suggested in the discussion today. Final comments from each panelist.
I just think I want to say, I would tell the graduates to bring heart, bring passion, bring skills, but bring patience and bring empathy. I teach in everything that I heard Gail said, because in the midst of everything, that is basically what you need. You have to have a heart for it to really want to go and make a difference in this area of development communication, and get all the skills you can while you can.
Become the hybrid Janet is talking about, yes? Janet?
We don't need to say anymore. Look, I think Lovette just said it all. Bring heart. Don't watch the money that may not come, or that is difficult to come. Bring heart, and heart will propel you to get creative, will propel us to. We've done it before as a country, so just bring heart and passion and courage to the task.
We can do it. Gail.
Can do it.
Yes, I mean, ditto to Lovette and Janet as well. And I would just say, bring all of that, but also grace. It's important as a professional, because it it is, as everybody has been saying, it's a long-term haul, right? It's not, you're not going to see immediate results, and there is a lot of pushback because there is not this immediacy to the work in terms of results. So giving yourself grace, and also, I mean, just very practically from in the field, celebrating the small wins, understanding and appreciating the small wins, human wins that are in this work, understanding and appreciating it, and taking courage from that to go on, because it is not easy. So yeah.
Well said, well said. Thank you so much to our participants in the chat. I see the comments coming through, many persons, saying cheers to another 50 years. So CARIMAC comms team must be included at the very beginning, indeed. So the comments are coming in, and we want to thank everybody for participating in today's discussion. I really enjoyed moderating it, and I want to thank my panelists. Thanks to Dr. Prendergast and also to the technical team at CARIMAC for supporting us today. And as we part, we all say happy 50th anniversary, CARIMAC, legacy of impact, future of innovation. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.